Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the XY Spark podcast, the podcast for men, where we seek to normalize conversations about men's mental health. This is your boy, your men's life coach, Rolando. Today, it's a TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. TGIF. Thank goodness it's Friday. I hope that you've all had a wonderful week. I hope that you're ready for the weekend because ready or not, here it is, or here it comes, or whatever you want to say. We just want to welcome you to our podcast. Thank you so much to all those who are here every weekday morning. We are here every weekday morning at 5:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. This week, however, a few things were going on in the life of your host, whereby I had to sort of stand down to sleep in a little bit, just to make sure that I don't show up, being the worst version of myself. So I'm happy to be here. And for those who showed up and never saw me, guys, I apologize. But, I also solicit your forgiveness and understanding. And we just want to say, hey, for those who are live on TikTok, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the tribe of men who are dedicated to paying attention to their mental health, not just some of the time, but all the time. So if you're live on TikTok, welcome. Please, you're also welcome to join us live on YouTube, and we're live on the Podbean app at xyspark.podbean.com. If this is your first time joining in the podcast, we want you to also know that we do offer life coaching calls right here in the moment. So if there's something that is going on with you that you can relate to our topic, then please type in the chat. Today is Friday. The caption is Freedom Friday. Freedom Friday. And what we want to talk about this morning is facing the fear factor. Facing the fear factor. What's your greatest fear? So today we're going to talk about some of those fears. And as we talk about some of those fears, the conversation is going to be directing us as men to start facing some of those fears with confidence. Every man must learn to face his fears and challenge the belief that he can get over it by ignoring that it exists. Every man has got to face his fears. Okay. As men, we must learn to face our fears. So, what are some of those fears? The fear of failure. We have to learn how to face those fear. The fear of missing out. We have to learn how to face those fears. The fear of not being good enough. We have to learn how to face those fears. What about this one? The fear of judgment. The fear of judgment. The fear of shame, the fear of not meeting the required standards. Here's one that I find a lot of men are not willing to admit: the fear of rejection. Is that a fear that you have to deal with? The fear of rejection, and I find that this fear happens a lot, oftentimes, with or younger men, and sometimes even men who are more experienced. Notice I never said older men; I said more experienced men. Okay, so all those fears that we have as men, we have to learn how to face those fears, because it is in facing these fears that we will experience growth. It is in facing these fears that we'll move from where we are and start expanding or broadening our boundaries, or expanding our network. As we learn to face those fears, we become sharpened to the reality of life itself, and we gain more understanding about how important it is for us to face our fears, because oftentimes it is in that refusal to face our fears that we end up, in self-harming behaviors. So if you're listening to the podcast right now and you're engaged in some self-harming behaviors, it may be happening because of your refusal to confront your fears. So what are your fears? And being really honest with yourself helps you to acknowledge what your fears are. No more playing around. No more denial. You see, denial is the room that those who are unwilling to face their fears spend a lot of time in. Let me say that again. Denial is the room that a lot of us as men choose to spend a lot of time in because of our refusal to confront our fears. So if you are living your life in that room of denial, it's time for you to open the door and let the fresh air of exposure and change in. As a matter of fact, it's time for you to get out of that room. It's time for you to start participating in making, behavioral changes and adjusting to new lifestyle changes that's going to help you to manage those fears. Is your fear the fear of shame, right? And oftentimes, this fear of, hey, if I say or I do this, it's going to be shameful. How do you know for a fact that it's going to be shameful? Because sometimes, guys, the thing that we are not recognizing is this: is whether we are doing something or not, whether we're going somewhere or not, we have to pause sometimes and ask ourselves, why am I perceiving this as a shameful thing? For example, if you're a man and you feel that, hey, it's a shame for me to ask or reach out for any supports at all, then you want to sort of ask yourself, where did you learn this idea? Where did this concept come from? Who taught you this? So it's important for you to, confront the idea that you have that if you do certain things, it's shameful. So confront the fear of shame, confront the fear of judgment. This is one of those big things that nobody has control over. I will say this to you that, hey, you may be listening to the podcast live right now. I'm okay with being judged, right? Right now, I know that, hey, there's judgment going on, but I'm not worried about that. I'm more focused on creating a safe space for men. And this space that we're seeking to create, it might not be a good fit for every man that shows up in the room. But I'm not fearful of that judgment. So you have got to sort of evaluate, hey, if I'm being judged for being passionate about something that's good, there's nothing I can do about that. I may be judged, you know, rightly, or I may be judged wrongly, or I may be misunderstood. But I can't control that. So as a man, you've got to understand that that's a part of your reality. In other words, the moment that you're walking on this planet, there are certain things that comes with the territory. And learning to accept and acknowledge that is a very good space to be in, because then you recognize that there's nothing you can do about people's judgment. It is going to happen one way or the other. If you isolate and stay locked away, there's judgment. If you go out, there's going to be judgment. So you have got to face that fear of being judged, because that is something that you cannot control. The thing that you can control is the harshness that you judge yourself with. And oftentimes we are our greatest critiques. Sometimes we become the main influencer that causes this, how do I say, this disruption in our ability to live above our fears. So it's very important for you to challenge your fears, confront those fears. If it's a fear of judgment, it's important for you to recognize that the only judgment that you can really control is the one that is formulated here, right? So, whatever judgment you're formulated in your mind about yourself, you may want to confront that fear of judgment as you recognize the reality that if I'm going to conquer this fear, I have to start facing this fear. So the fear of judgment. So yeah, so there's that fear of missing out. And sometimes we think that that fear only impacts, adolescents, teenagers, younger folks. But I've seen where this fear of missing out, or FOMO as they call for short, it affects grown mature men as well. And because of this fear of missing out, several times as men, we compromise our standards, we compromise our values, we compromise on our non-negotiables. As a matter of fact, because of that fear of missing out, many of us as men, we don't have any standards whereby we live our lives. It's a anything goes sort of thing, because we feel guilty that if I set boundaries, or if I say no, or if I don't show up, then people are going to think I'm not a nice guy, or people are going to think I'm behaving as though I'm better than. And so facing that fear is equally important, because when you learn to face that fear of missing out, it helps you to build your self confidence. Your validation is no longer being fed by external influences, but your validation is now being fed by your own internal belief of who you are, what you're worth, and what your value are. All right, so if you are not facing that fear of missing out, you've got to start facing that fear as a way of shifting yourself, freeing yourself from the, how do I say, the psychological bondages that you have created through the lens that you have been viewing yourself with. So as men, you've got to learn to face those fears, face them. All right, face that fear of failure. That's a big one. The fear of failure. And one guy says it this way. I'm not remember his name. I'm going to seek to paraphrase, but he says it this way: failure is not final; it's finding ground. Right? That's how he says it. Failure is not final; it's finding ground. And as go through this process, as you continue to walk this journey, walk this path of life, you've got to get a new perspective going as it relates to, am I that person who fears failure, quote unquote failure, so much that I'm not challenging myself, I'm not exposing myself to doing new things, I'm not tracing I'm not chasing, rather, my goals. I'm not trying to work hard for my dreams to be fulfilled, because I fear so much that if I do it, I may fail. And then how is that going to look? But you have to face that fear of failure. All right. If you don't know how to swim and you never go into the water, you're never going to learn. You're never going to understand what it looks like to really swim. So fear, guys, it sort of sinks us into that space of mediocrity. It sinks us into that space where we're not motivated. It sinks us into that space where we have low self-worth, and where we are not challenging ourselves to break cycles, right? Fear, puts us on a platform where we feel stuck, we isolate, and we create scenarios in our minds that prevents us from doing what? Catapulting ourselves out of stagnation. So your greatest fear, knowing what your greatest fear is important. What about this fear? The fear of acknowledging that it's safe to have feelings, right? That's a big fear. So many men, so many of us as men, we have not yet gotten to that place where we're able to say, hey, it's okay for me to feel. Because we put that on the back burner. Many of us as men, we have not gone to that place where we're able to say, hey, you know what? You know, I am a human being and it's okay for me to have feelings and express emotions, right? And we are struggling to acknowledge that as men. We have been really desensitized around anything that's emotional or anything that's is feeling related, right? You know, we were taught, many of us as men, that our role is not to be nurturers, so we leave that up to our partners to do. All right. And it's so important for us to face that fear as well, because it will help us to be more effective fathers, more effective partners. It will help us to be, more holistic in the way that we live our lives, because we will no longer be dwelling on the physical, but we also dwell on the psychological and the emotional. And as men, we have to learn how to stay in tune with our emotional selves, because when you're in tune with our emotional selves, it makes room for us to live a healthier, happier life. So, facing your fear with confidence is key, whatever the fear is. And there may be a fear that you're experiencing that was not mentioned in the podcast today. What we're saying is it's important for you to identify what is your fear. Then you need to identify what are the obstacles that's preventing you from facing that fear. You then need to move towards, exploring what can I do in order to conquer this fear. You then need to look at, realistically speaking, if this is something that I can't do by myself, do I need to get some help to deal with overcoming this fear? All right, so that you can come out as a winner, so that you can really engage in that process where you have regained your momentum and you're no longer locked away in your mind about challenging the fear. So what fear? What's a fear factor that you need to face? I want to say it's this is the time. So as you segue into enjoying another weekend as best as possible, some of you may be working. I'm not sure what your plans are, but I want you to, take a few moments or so just to reflect on, what do I fear the most? What are some of the things that I fear? And as you identify that, I want you to now start to look at a strategy that's going to help you to conquer that fear so that you can become the best version of yourself. Thank you so much for being here with us again on the podcast. This is your boy, your men's life coach, Rolando. We want to say, have a wonderful weekend. And remember, you go out there and continue to be sane and safe. And let's continue to work hard and be passionate as we seek to normalize conversations about men's mental health. Until next time, this is your boy, your men's life coach, Rolando. Thank you for joining us. And as you go, I just want you to remember that at XY Spark, we believe that there is a spark in you. And we will see you again next time, right here Do have a great day.